Good morning, everyone. I am Sharon Ricks, and on behalf of the CUNY Advising Council, I welcome you to the annual CUNY Advising Summit 2021. Our annual summit is an opportunity for us to connect and engage with advising professionals across CUNY. This year's theme, Advising in the New Normal, opens the door to conversations on how academic advising professionals navigate the field of academic advisement in the wake of a global pandemic. We will talk about the lessons we have learned and are still learning, and talk about what will be our new normal. Over the next 2 days, we have lined up some dynamic speakers. Today, we have Dr. Charlie Nutt, Executive Director of NACADA. Our advising colleagues have put together 12 concurrent sessions that offer the chance for us to learn from each other, share best practices, new initiatives, and hear how we are using technology to reach and teach our students. We will also talk about how we are taking care of ourselves and supporting each other as we navigate the new normal. Finally, I urge everyone to stay with us until the very end on both days. You are in for a treat. Now, before we get started, just a few reminders and instructions to help you get through the day. We're in a webinar format, so while you cannot see the other attendees, they are with you today. Over 600 people registered for the summit. Everyone is on mute, but you will have the opportunity to ask our keynote and plenary speakers questions at the end of their presentations. The webinar format has a Q&A function you will see at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to send your questions. Don't worry, we'll remind you. The program you received today has all of the Zoom links for each speaker and concurrent session. Finally, we encourage you to post on social media that you are attending the CUNY Advising Summit 2021. Use the hashtag advising in the new normal. Now let's get started. I now hand it over to Dr. Lucinda Zoe, Senior University Dean and Vice Provost for Academic Programs and Policy. Dr. Zoe.
Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the 2021 Advisement Summit. I'd like to begin this morning by just recognizing and thanking the council co-chairs, Victoria Romero and Sharon Ricks, along with Elena Burke, Kate McPherson, and the rest of the Summit Planning Committee, as well as Mari Watanabe at Central and our friends at Complete College America, for all the efforts that they have put into putting together another, I'm sure, what's going to be a spectacular and engaging event that will speak to where you are as advisors and leave you renewed, relieved to know that you're not alone, and revitalized by the summit's end tomorrow. So with that, I was really excited and delighted when Sharon asked me to introduce Dr. Charlie Nutt as our opening keynote speaker to kick off the annual summit and set the tone for the 2 days that we'll have together in the month of April, in the second year of the pandemic, stardate 2021. Yes, context is everything. The changes and challenges that have brought on by this last year could have been predicted and anticipated by no one. That literally overnight, we would all be hashtag advising in the new normal. But here we are. Here we are. So if you've ever needed to be encouraged or pumped up or patted on the back and in need of an advisement spirit animal, now is that time. And that, my friends and comrades, is who we have the pleasure of spending some time with this morning with Dr. Charlie Nutt. Now, By way of introduction, I could tell you that Charlie Nutt has had a 43-year career in higher education and has literally put the professional status of advisement and advisors on the global map, changing the international higher education landscape for all of time. But I won't. Or I could tell you that Charlie Nutt began his academic life as a community college graduate who worked his way through the maze of academic degree attainment in the fine, beautiful state of Georgia, from an associate degree to a baccalaureate in science education, to a master's in education, and finally to his doctorate in educational leadership in higher education, and then went on to serve as a high school teacher, an assistant principal, a professor of English, a director of orientation and advising, and a vice president for student development, a director of development and admission at a private K-12 institution before moving on to Kansas State to join the NACADA executive office and eventually become the executive director in 2007. I could also mention that he is presently teaching graduate level courses in Kansas State University's counseling, special education, and student affairs department in the College of Education, but I'm not going to, since you can read all of this in his bio. I could even tell you that he was the prime mover in the development of the NACADA K through state graduate certificate program in academic advisement, as well as its master's degree in academic advisement and its doctoral program in leadership and academic advisement, and the creation of the NACADA Center for Research and Academic Advising and Student Success in association with the College of Education. But I don't have to, because you can read all about it on your own on the Google machine. But what I'd rather do, by way of introduction, is tell you a story, tell you a personal story that I think better illustrates and introduces who this gentleman is. Several years ago, one fine June day, I found myself sitting in the small auditorium of Hostos Community College in the Bronx, awaiting one of our keynote speakers to take the stage. The house was packed. The small auditorium is beautiful. If you've been to Hostos, it's a pretty good sized venue, gorgeous. It was full of advisors, faculty, colleagues from across CUNY. And out on the stage steps this glorious and colorful presence in screaming turquoise canvas high-top tennis shoes. Yes, I have the photos. And for the next 45 minutes, I was mesmerized by Dr. Charlie Nutt. Not only did I find myself with this sense of growing pride and joy that I had made a career for myself in the field of higher education, and that I was a part of what Charlie Nutt was so eloquently presenting as he commanded the stage that June day. But I was just bursting with a sense of envy that I was not an academic advisor, that I had not taken that path along the academic highway of my own career. And on that day, my understanding of and appreciation for the work and contributions of advisors just exploded. And as you all know, anybody that knows me, I practically worship advisors. I've made no secret of it. I sing your praises at every opportunity. By the end of that presentation that day in June, I had these huge tears streaming down my face. I was embarrassed. I was trying to hide it. So I sort of glanced to my left where I think Mari was sitting. She was weeping. Next to her, I glanced and I believe it was Alana, also weeping. Lisa, sobbing. I looked down the whole row I was in was weeping from joy, from an overwhelming sense of being seen and understood. Well, pretty soon I was just sobbing, forget the weeping. I was just almost like outright sobbing. and laughing. I was laughing so hard through my tears because we had all of us become so emotional listening to Charlie Nutt make his case. And he presented a big mirror up for the advisors in the audience that day to see clearly what magnificent beings they were and the difference that they are making in the lives of countless students every single day. On that day, this man touched my heart. He opened my heart, and I am here to tell you, very few people have this gift. Very few. To open the hearts of other people, to lead from the heart, to make you feel from the inside out, and to be able to see more clearly. I think it was Mother Teresa who said the longest journey in the world is from the heart to the head. So by way of introduction this morning, I would like to welcome and introduce you to Dr. Charlie Nutt, a truly gifted and enlightened human being who has clearly traveled this long journey and who has the rarest of gifts, the ability to touch your heart, to lift your spirits, to broaden your horizons, and to make you smile. Now, he is going to be joined this morning by his NACADA colleague, Sean Bridgeton, who will join him at the Q&A. So friends, my colleagues, my comrades, I am most happy to introduce you to the quintessential spirit animal and incomparable guide for advisors across the globe, Dr. Charlie Nutt.
Well, thank you so very much. I'm not sure how to follow that. That was beautiful, Cinda. Thank you. I'm glad you did say tears of joy, because for a moment I thought I'd made you all cry just because it was a sad day. But
no, it was definitely tears of joy.
But thank you so very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
That. It is such a joy to be with all of you again. I remember that June day as well, and what a beautiful opportunity it was to see all of you face to face. And so even though I can't be with you there in your various offices or places across the CUNY system, it's such a joy to be here and to be a part of your work today. So I want to begin. I'm going to have to ask somebody to let me share my screen, and I hope that will work. So what I want to talk about today is really how do we reimagine advising as we think about this new normal, as we think about the world as we go to in the future and move forward. You know, as Lucinda said, a year ago, the world changed. A year ago, our lives changed. A year ago, our students changed. What was going on with them? And no one, I think, in the entire globe truly experienced what you there in New York experienced. You truly were, good or bad, however you want to describe it, you were the pinpoint of what was happening in our country as we looked at the pandemic. I have a pulmonologist here in Manhattan, Kansas, who decided that he would go and volunteer. And Stephen Short, Dr. Stephen Short from Manhattan, went to New York, worked in a hospital there for over 6 months, working with the various patients that came into the hospital through the emergency room, and kind of dialogued and put this across Facebook every single day. And I remember reading what Stephen said and reading what was going on in the hospitals there and reading what was going on in the streets there. Pictures of Times Square empty, pictures of the subway with him and maybe 2 other people, and normally a subway I would remember being packed on a normal morning at 8 o'clock in the morning going somewhere. Picturing the streets in front of the hospital, which would normally be steaming with cars everywhere, with no one in the streets at all. It was pretty amazing to see these things occurring from his standpoint. But from my standpoint, quite frankly, I was remembering all of you. I was thinking through what the rest of us were just kind of imagining might be happening. You were living it every day. And I really want to begin by thanking you, because what you did in the past year was to take students who were dealing with probably the most uh, pandemic, I'm not even sure is the word that describes what you all went through. And none of that could have occurred if it were not for you in this room. The academic advisors made the difference in the CUNY system. As we went to a new world, faculty were figuring out how to quickly get their courses online, and would figure out how to do teaching online and how to do all of the pieces that need to happen. While all of that was occurring, there was this cadre of professionals. There was this cadre of people who truly were there to help students figure out what to do. And if it had not been for you, I truly believe your students' lives would have been vastly changed in ways they can't even imagine. So I want to begin by thanking all of you, because you truly made the difference in how the CUNY system dealt with the pandemic. But more importantly, you changed your students' lives because there was a constant in their lives. There was a constant that they knew they could always go to. There was a constant that truly put us together, told us what that was, and that was you, the advisors. So I want to thank you as you think about that. So as we think about how we move forward, I love this quote, and many of you heard me say it. We are all faced with a series of great opportunities, brilliantly disguised as unsolvable problems. Just imagine the past year, unsolvable problems that you never even imagined could exist. The problems that your students faced, not just in their education, but in their personal lives and what was happening. The problems with how do we get from a totally in person to a totally virtual experience and still make college and the educational experience part of their lives. And those problems created a new world. And each of you in this room were part of that. And I just really want to thank you, because you took those problems and you made amazing opportunities for your students that no one had ever thought could exist. So just be aware that we all recognize that the problems you encountered created great opportunities for your students. I love this poster that we had, and when we enter this office, I think we have to expand it now to when we enter this virtual space. As your students enter your virtual meetings each time you meet with them, they're used to walking into an office, they're not walking into a virtual experience, but it doesn't change. When we're meeting with students, what you bring to the table every day is number one, you respect it. Your students need to know that you respect their decisions, you respect where they're moving, and quite frankly, you're respecting what they're going through in their personal lives as they deal with this pandemic and getting an education. That you value them, that you value what they bring to the table and how they work forward. They need to be heard, particularly in this time when many times nobody else is listening to them. Many times when they don't quite feel heard at home, or they may not feel heard at work, or quite frankly, in what you were dealing with in New York with the many deaths and the many illnesses you had, they weren't even heard in their own homes many times because of what was occurring. You were the people who were hearing your students and listening to them. And then the most important was they knew they mattered. They knew in the past year in this virtual environment that you all created together that they mattered. They knew that what they were bringing to the table at your college or your major, or your department, whatever you may be doing, that they mattered as students, but they mattered as people, and they mattered as someone that may be guiding their entire family to have a more successful life as they moved out of this pandemic. So whether they're in your office or your virtual office, These things are important, and you bring that to the table as you work with students. We have to go back to Vincent Tito, and we have to recognize as we talk about retention and graduation, particularly in this virtual time, it is all going to go back to the idea that it's all about a good educational experience. In this virtual world, what does that good educational experience look like? And as we move from virtual back to the reality of on campus, how does that educational experience transition between the two? How do we work with students who will continue to do virtual for whatever reason, but then also have that in person? That good educational experience is what you're all providing. Now, please note that doesn't say a good registration period. That doesn't say a good course scheduling period. That doesn't say a good opportunity to get your courses and read your degree audit. None of that's there. It says a good educational experience, meaning that you are all part of the educational mission of your campus. You are all part of the educational experiences that the CUNY system provides to students, so that what you bring to the table is just as important as those English courses I used to teach, as my colleagues that taught developmental studies, those courses used to teach. You bring this teaching and learning environment to students that we cannot ever forget. But we also mean that we have to begin thinking through, what is it you teach every day? What is it you're convincing students that they need to do in order to be successful? Because part of this educational experience is looking at advising as a teaching and learning opportunity. It is not about registration. It's not about scheduling. Those pieces may be part of what you teach, but the educational experience is what we're talking about in order to retain students and in order for students to persist to graduation or transfer. So as we think about what we've learned during COVID, I think we've learned several things. I think the first thing we learned is technology. We used to think of technology as a way that we drove students to see us. We now have learned that this is how students see us. That through technology, through the virtual environment, is how we've connected with students, how we've communicated with students, but many times it's how we saw students. And that seeing part is what's so valuable, because students need to be seen. Students need to be heard. And this technology that used to drive them to us is now what we put into place for how we see students and how we listen to students. It's a very big difference in how we think of technology. We know that those high touch students, those students who really, those minority, those low income, those first generation, those students who need to be touched, they need to know that people are looking out for them. In this virtual world, they become even more demanding of engagement and meaningful connections than ever before. The students who need us to reach out to them the most still need us, but it's at it's even a higher level than before, because obviously when they're virtual, they don't quite know how to engage. When they're virtual, they don't know what a real connection looks like, because I might look at the student in front of me, but if I don't connect with them, then how do we move forward? So that high touch, low touch, high tech, low tech, we've got to really think about it in terms of it's all about engagement and it's all about connections. And those students that we knew we needed to work with the most, we still have to do, but in this virtual world. And as we move back to on campus, we have to think about, how do we keep that moving? How do we connect the virtual with what we do live on the campus? How do those two connect? So just because we went to virtual last spring and it was overnight, what I encourage you to think about is not to think about that we're going to just shut virtual off and go back to live. We've got to integrate those. They have to connect. So how are we going to continue to hit that engagement? How are we going to continue to connect students both virtually and in person as we begin to make this transition back to the in-purpose purpose connections there. One thing we learned over the past year is students that would cancel appointments live are not canceling appointments virtually. When you look at what the literature tells us, as we look at the research over the past year, one of the things we've learned is students are less likely to cancel a virtual appointment than an in-person appointment. So what does that mean for those of you who are advising every day? I think it says several things. I think one is that you're seeing more students than maybe you saw in a face-to-face situation. Those students who had scheduled appointments but didn't show up, no, they're showing up and more students are wanting to get in to see you. So one of the things that we have to think about is how do we really communicate to our people making financial decisions? How do we communicate to our presidents, to our provost, to our chancellor? How do we communicate that advising is reaching more students than ever before virtually? So as we think about caseload, as we think about how we begin to manage what we do with students, we have to recognize that virtually we're reaching more students than we ever did before. And how do we continue that real connection as we move back to back to being on campuses? Because we have to remember that students will follow through what they've done in the past year. So those students who virtually would not cancel appointments, what we want to do is create the situation so they don't go back to that canceling in-person meetings. That means we have to begin to think through those connections as we work with those students. We know that students will stay longer on a camera talking to you than they did in person. Students would come in, they'd see you, in 2 minutes they'd be gone. What we've learned virtually is students want to talk to you. They want to ask you questions. They want to ask you anything it is to have that connection with you. So those appointments that used to be 15 or 20 minutes are much longer than they used to be. So how do we manage that? How do we begin to think that through? Because what it tells us virtually, we have learned students want to be seen. Students want to be heard. So how do we keep that moving as we come back to going on our campuses? And then the last thing we've learned, or one of the last things we've talked about, is that students have virtually have talked to us about a lot of things that we never talked to about in an appointment in your office. This is where they begin to talk about things like being afraid or family issues, particularly the past year with the number of illnesses and the people in hospitals, and even sadly, the people who passed away. How did that affect them? You're the person that they had an opportunity to talk to and to be heard about. The financial challenges. There was an article this morning in the Inside Higher Ed talking about in the California system, their enrollment has dropped dramatically. And one of the reasons are the financial challenges that students are having when their jobs have been let go, or they've been let go because of the COVID, or the lack of income they used to have compared to today, which means they're spending less money going to college, and they're more concerned about it when they meet with you. How do we have those conversations? And then that whole concept of the imposter syndrome. I don't really feel like I belong. I really don't know if this is where I need to be. They're more likely to have that conversation with you virtually than they may have had in your office. You may get the opportunity to talk to students about these types of issues on the first meeting, not the 10th meeting. So how do we think about those as we think about this role you play in reaching out to students virtually and in person that makes them feel a part of the CUNY system, that make them clearly see they're important to your institution and they're important to the whole atmosphere of what your college is about. That's what you do every day. And how do we continue that? We've learned that even though we want to send informational emails that tell them everything to do, they still want to connect with you on camera. They still want you to affirm the information you sent, so that you sent them an email, they still want to talk to you about it. You sent them an email with all the things they needed to work on, but they still want to talk about it. So how do we begin to recognize that just because we've sent information, it still means they want to affirm that by talking to a person. We know that from what we've dealt with in the past year. We know that virtual engagement must now drive us to the new normal. That this virtual engagement that we've had with students, we've got to begin to connect with. We've got to begin to recognize, how do we take that when we go back to in person? How do we keep that engagement, the high level it's been virtually, in a situation that is very different? How do we connect those? Very important as we move forward. We know that virtually connecting with students beyond that one in-person meeting has to be done well, has to be done strategically. We have to think through what it is we're doing virtually, what will we do in person, and how do those two fit together. We no longer can just think about, we've got 10 meetings a day, but strategically, how we connect these students to students. Strategically, how we connect these students to the other services on campus in a virtual or in a live environment. These become very important to us, and we've learned that in the past year. The virtual experience has given us time to look into the lives of students in ways we never have. Many of us have never even been inside a student's apartment or house. You've seen the inside of their house now. You've seen their cats. You've seen their dogs. You've seen their children. You've seen the pictures on the wall. You've seen the family as they run through the building. You've talked to them about what things are occurring. You've been in their lives in ways you never had been before. Now, in some ways that might scare you, but in other ways, the students have opened up their lives to you in ways they had not done before. The other side of that is many times we've opened up our lives in that way. Many of you may have done advising this year with a child sitting on your lap who no longer went to daycare. Or as you're doing that, you've got your child beside you doing your homework or doing his homework. Or at the same time you're advising, you've got a cat that leaps up into your lap, and all of a sudden it's a conversation with you and your cat as you're talking to a student. So we've been seen into their lives in ways that we never thought, but they've seen into your lives. So as we think about we moving forward, is we don't want to lose that. We want to continue to talk to the students about, oh no, when last time I saw you on camera, your child was there. Tell me how your students doing, or tell me how your family's doing. What's happened with, tell me about your cat. Tell me what's good. We want to keep that connection because it's so important, because that is their lives. And many times we've had students come to our colleges that we never got a chance to go into their lives, and you've done that virtually. Let's don't lose that. Let's continue that as we continue to go forward. And then I can't stress enough, guys, you cannot engage if you don't have your camera on. Students have to see you. Students have to know you're listening. Students have to know you're connected. But you also need to see the student you're talking to. Those cameras are the way that you know when they understand you. It's the way you can tell from their face that they're totally lost, or that face of telling you, I don't really understand what you're saying, or I really am just in a horrible mood today, and I don't have time to talk about what classes to take. You need to find out what's going on in my life right now. Do not forget that face-to-face, either in person or virtual, has to be there, because that's how you connect with your students. You've done an amazing job in the past year. Let's don't lose that as we go back to moving on campus. How do we keep that engagement there by visually being able to communicate with students as we talk with them? So what is it that we need to really help students understand in this virtual world? And in the coming back is the amount of time needed to study versus expectations. You know, when we taught to students in a live situation, that was one aspect. But as we did it virtually, how do we help students understand, how do you combine the virtual teaching with the virtual learning, to the studying, to the lab? How do we virtually do that? And how do we find the times in the day to make that happen? the course of study versus their perception. Let's be honest. I think all careers, all jobs, all programs of study have had a real shift in the past year, because what it might look like pre-COVID may be very different than what it is now. And as a student is thinking about a program of study, or thinking about a major, or thinking about a degree, or thinking about where they want to go, it may be very different today than it was a year ago. And they really want to talk to you about those issues. So that program of study versus their perception is so important. And that's what you teach every single day. And then the last piece I think we can't forget is there's a different culture in college and high school. If our students came directly to us last year, they had part of high school in person, then they had it virtually. How does that going to differ when we get to college? That college just have a different culture, but how's that culture different than what they've experienced in the past? We really have to help students understand that. And that's part of what you teach every day, is how do these connections occur and how do they work together? So what is it you teach students? We got to help them to craft their education. How do we mold it? How do you put it together? What's your goal within that? You got to understand the path they've chosen. You know, if you want to be this, what does that really look like? And do you really understand what it means to be a teacher? Do you really understand what it means to be in the performing arts? Do you know what it's going to look like in the future? Do you know how that focus is? You're helping them to understand that path. And it's more than just a pathway to a degree. It's a pathway to a passion. It's a pathway to a vision. It's a pathway to a life change for them. So as we think of pathways are so important to our institution to mold how we want students to progress through our college. We have to understand that pathway for them may be a pathway to reach a goal they never thought they could reach before. And you're helping them do that. They've got to understand how they take the skills and knowledge that they're learning as they talk with you and take it to the workforce. Virtually, what are they learning? Virtually, what's the knowledge? But then how do they put that as they go into the workforce that may no longer be virtual, or could be a hybrid approach? So as you talk to students, it's more than just what you need to know today in this particular meeting, whether it be virtual or in person, but it's how do we move it forward? How do we think about using what you're talking about every day as they leave your institution and go into the workforce, or go into graduate school, or go into whatever the case may be, but how they can take it with them and utilize it. You want to create that culture of learning around the undergraduate experience. That culture of it's all about what I'm learning as I talk with you as an advisor, but it's also about what I'm learning in that situation in the course, in the classroom, whether it be virtual or live. It's that culture of learning that you want them to understand. You want them to understand that an undergraduate experience is about learning. It's not about getting a degree. It's about learning what you need to do, what you need to be able to demonstrate, and what you need to value and appreciate as you go through the undergraduate experience. So as advisors, how are you describing that cultural experience, culture of learning to your students? How are you describing what the learning outcomes are as you move students through this experience? Always focusing on a culture of learning as we move forward. We want to engage students in their education. We want to engage them in reading their passion, not just a job. We want to get them to understand that this is a learning that will move them forward to whatever they want to do after college, but that you're helping to begin them on this pathway and then guide them through this pathway while they're at your institution. Because a student, we've learned virtually, cannot be successful if they're not engaged. We always do that before, but virtually we've really seen that come to fruition. So how do we keep that pathway, keep that engagement forward as we think about advising in a virtual world, as we come back to real-time advising, as we do a hybrid, How do we keep that engagement? This is also where you as advisors have to think about how do you engage yourself in what you're learning. Because if you're going to be a quality advisor, then you've got to be constantly learning about your institution, constantly learning about how virtual teaching affects virtual learning, how all of these pieces fit together. So it's not just your student engagement, it's your engagement that's so important as you think about how you work with your colleagues on your campus or colleagues across the whole CUNY system, because your engagement is key to your success. And your engagement is key to your students' engagement, ultimately to their success in college. How do we do exactly what Complete College America talks about is building pathways to success, looking at how prerequisites lead you to the courses you need to take, but how students bring that together because of the conversation they've had with you as an advisor, the teaching and learning they've had with you as an advisor, not the scheduling, not the registration, but the learning that you do every single day as you teach students. We've got to keep that engagement so important to what we do. So what matters most as we think about this? Well, the first thing is everybody's going to be motivated to learn. In the past year, your entire institution, your entire system has learned in ways you never imagined you'd have to learn. And it had to be more than just compliance. You had to think about what the culture of learning was for administrators, for faculty, for students, for advisors. Because if you're not all motivated to learn, then the past year would not have been able to happen. Each of you had to be motivated and motivated in new ways. And now, as we think about how we move into whatever this new normal is going to look like, how do you bring that forward? You can't lose that motivation. So you think about what you're learning the next 2 days, how do you take that back to your advice and how you continue to be motivated to learn as you move forward? Relationships. Advising is about relationships. Advising is about building a relationship with your students. It's about helping students build relationships with their classmates. It's about helping students build relationships with a faculty member in a virtual environment. It's about you building relationships with your fellow advisors in your office. It's about you building a relationship with those in financial aid or the career center or the counseling center or the faculty for this that are teaching your students. Relationships are so key to student success. As advisors, you understand this better than anyone. How do you build those relationships? How have you built them virtually? And then how are you going to take that into what the new normal looks like and not lose those relationships that are so important? You got to set clear and high expectations. As I've said all along, if students think they're only going to make a C in a course, that's all they're going to make. If students have only come to see you to get registered, then you haven't used the past year of virtual environments to help them learn that we want them to come see us about things that are much more important than scheduling. They're about all the issues about what they need to know. You have to set clear and high expectations for each other and for yourself as you're moving advising forward. One of the things I want you all to think about is how you always going to really set advising at the highest expectation possible for student learning, student retention, student persistence. But what does that mean you need to do as you move this forward and think about this? We know as we've seen less students enroll, and as we've seen what's impacted us financially, that we really got to begin to think about how do we align our resources, policies, and practices with this new world. We all had a lot of policies and practices pre-March 2020 that probably had been around for years and years and years that people just assumed we always would do, that all of a sudden you had to recreate, or you had to throw those away and start with new policies and procedures that were in this virtual world. Don't lose those. Don't go back to old practices, because when you get on campus, you say, well, now I still want my students to take these 12 forms and get them signed by 12 offices before they can. You didn't do it virtually. Why are you going to go back to old policies and procedures? Make sure they align with where your students are today. What are your students learning in the classroom? What are they learning in the advising appointment? What are they learning in orientation? Assessment is key to student success, but assessment is also key to your success. How are you assessing whether what you do every day is meeting student needs? How are you assessing is your structure the way that you had to function in a virtual world and coming back to an in-person world? Assessment is key. What is it students are learning, and how are we measuring that? What is it you are teaching, and how are you measuring that? So we cannot ever lose track of that. Assessment of student learning and teaching has to be part of the advising culture and the advising relationships with students as you move forward. And the leadership at all levels matter. Not just your chancellor, not just your president, but you and your office every day as a leader. And how do we move those? So what are some guiding questions that you want to think about over the next year, 2 years, 5 years, decade, as we move forward? So the first thing is, what is the college experience that you want students to have? If you say that we want students to have these experiences through academic advising, how do you make that occur? So we've got to begin by asking that question. What is the experience that students will have because they met with an advisor? What's the experience that students will have because they connected and were able to follow through a pathway to meet a degree? What does that experience look like? What do they feel? What do they learn? What can they demonstrate? How do you want to describe that experience to someone who has no idea what academic advising does? How do you communicate to them the experience you are building for students? If you haven't defined that, I encourage you to spend some time talking about that among your colleagues, among the system of what you want those to be. Once you've decided that, you then can begin to make sure you've got a clear mission for academic advising. And then what are your goals for reaching that? What are the CUNY system mission statement for advising? But what is each of your campuses? Now, the one things I've always been so impressed with your system is you've got a clear mission statement. You've got a clear set of goals. But as we think about moving back from virtual to in-person, have those missions changed? Have our goals changed? It's a good time to step back and be sure that our mission is still the same, that our goals are the same in this time of transition. Are we sure what we think we're doing in advising meets a mission statement that we've all agreed upon? So how do we think about that? What are the professional development opportunities that you're providing? You have this CUNY annual conference that occurs, you're advising 2 days, but what's happening on your campus as well? What are those professional development activities that are occurring on your campuses, as well as occurring at the CUNY level, as well as with your colleagues at the four-year universities? How are you connecting with those? Professional development has to be a key part of how you will grow, how you will engage to make your students grow and engage. One of the things I've always found very different is that we want our students to grow academically. We want them to grow personally. We want them to grow about careers, or we want them to grow in getting a degree. Whatever the case may be, we can describe every single day what we want students to learn, do, and value. But then we only do professional development around technology. What's the new banner system? What's the new degree work system? What's the new? Just because you can do all of that doesn't mean you help students learn. So what is your professional development built around all of those technology pieces, all the software issues, all the requirements for graduation or degrees or degree audits to get a degree? All of those things are important, but you understand how students are learning? Do you understand the developmental theory that helps them learn how they move forward? Have you really talked about those student learning theories, those developmental theories? Are you having professional development that provides you the opportunity to grow so your students can grow? I encourage you to continue to focus on that as you move forward. And then how are you going to assess whether you've achieved all of these pieces as you move forward and think about it? So I want to end with this poster that many of you have seen and really talk about what you do as you advise. You encourage questions, you engage students, you support critical thinking, you boost spirits, you inspire dreams, you cultivate learning. That's what you do every day. But I want to tell you a story. I'm going to end with a story about how what you do comes back to our lives in very different ways every day. Back in 1987, when I first went to Coastal Georgia Community College, I had a student who wanted to be a nurse. And she came into my office and she was probably in her middle 30s. She had 3 children, single parent, and she was going to be a nurse. And I helped her get wherever she needed to be in her courses and got her scheduled. And she went on her way and everything was happy. Well, she came back, I don't know, maybe at midterm, and she walked in with the idea of I need to drop math. And after I asked her a couple of questions about why she needed to drop math, she burst into tears and said, I can't do this. I cannot come to college anymore. I'm not smart enough. Everybody else understands everything I don't understand. Everybody else is always ahead of me. I don't know she was just beside herself. And I got her to calm down enough to tell me exactly what was going on. I said, tell me about your life. Just tell me what every day, what it looks like to be you, Julia. Describe your life to me. So she started describing her life to me, and she worked at the hospital in the emergency room. If you came in to the local hospital and you had to log in and answer all those questions and give your insurance, but she was the person at that registration desk. And she did that from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. She got off at 7 and she went immediately to her mother's house and picked up her 3 children. She got them ready for school. She went and dropped them off at school for the day. And then she was in my class every day at 9 o'clock for English. She finished my class and she went to study skills. She went to math. She went to reading. She was your typical developmental studies students who needed to get all the background before she could move forward. She finished courses every day about 2 by the time she did all the different variation of classes. And being a good student, she did everything we told her to do. She immediately went to a study group and began doing her math problems or her reading problems or writing the essay for my course. She worked in the Learning Center with tutors. She worked with me in my office. She worked with a math study group. So that by the time she had finished doing everything we told her to do to be successful, it was 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon or later. Well, think about your own lives. What happened then? All her children then came home from school, got off the bus. She wanted to be there when they got there. And then what did she do? She fed them dinner. She helped them with their homework. She listened to their problems. She helped them figure out how to be successful the next day. She did everything that a good parent does who wants their children to be successful as a single parent, wanted to meet all those requirements that a single parent needs to meet. She then put them to bed, and then she studied for 2 hours, and then she went back to work from 11 to 7, and the day started all over. And I finally looked at her and I said, Julia, honey, you're not stupid, you're exhausted. I said, you haven't slept more than 2 hours a day for the whole semester. You simply are exhausted. You don't need to drop math because you can't do math. You need to drop math because you need an hour more to sleep or 2 hours to sleep. How do we rearrange your schedule? So we rearranged it. We worked with it. She gave me the typical story. I was going to be 10 years before I'm a nurse. And I said, you're going to be 10 years whether you're a nurse or not. Let's get you there. So we got through it. I watched her walk across the stage with her back with her associate degree in nursing probably about 8 years later. I kept up with Julia over the years because she was a local town girl, and I knew her mother and father. I'd gone to school with her aunt and uncle, and so I kept up with Julia. And I watched her get her baccalaureate degree in nursing, and then I watched her get her master's degree in nursing. I would keep up with her, and I'd see her relatives and say, "Tell Julia, I said hello, and I'm so proud of her," and all of those things occurred. So 2020 occurred last year, and I went home on February the 27th because my brother-in-law called me and said, "I need you to come home. Your sister has cancer," which I knew, and she's having problems, and she's been through 3 chemo treatments and done very well, but she's having breathing problems, so we put her into the hospital. And so I immediately took a flight home and went straight to the hospital to be with my sister and my brother-in-law. Spent the night with them that first night in the hospital, and that was on a Thursday. And by Friday, Pam really, the oxygen wasn't working anymore. She couldn't breathe anymore. And so I knew we were heading toward something dramatic within that. And I walked into the her room that Friday as the doctor was explaining about putting her on a ventilator and what may occur. And I looked up, and there was Julia. She was Pam's nurse. And for the next 12 days, while I watched her get sicker, and she then passed away, Julia was right. What you do creates people who change lives. I'm so honored to be here, so honored to be an advisor, and I'm so honored to know each and every one of you and what you do every single day. Thank you so much for all you do, and thank you for advising. Thank you. So I think we've got some questions, perhaps. Sean, do you want to come on and we'll respond to some questions that may have come across?
Certainly, certainly. Hello. It's nice to be here with all of you. Thank you. We do have one question in the chat. Here, and it is from Eva. For those who have experienced a drop off in participation and an increase in advising cancellations, what outreach strategies can we use to engage them and draw them into what will be a great educational experience? So I have some ideas for that, Charlie. I don't know if you want to go first
Perfect.
or.
No, go right ahead, Sean. That's great.
Okay, so yeah, the conversations I've had with people who are doing the work that you're doing, the really important work that you're doing, I've heard that what happened at the beginning is the students were kind of rushing in, like Charlie was saying, and that's what the data are showing us, that we had this increase. But then there's kind of like this fatigue. I think some students are getting tired of all these virtual meetings and they want to talk to someone in person. So sometimes they're canceling the meetings, and plus there's just a lot going on in people's lives. And so I think that might be a little bit what's happening. And I think also kind of trying to dig into maybe what are some of the reasons the cancellations are happening. As Charlie mentioned before, there could be lots of things going on in their lives. There could be illnesses, there could be fallout from people losing jobs and those sorts of things. One of the things that we have found that has been working is to engage students asynchronously so that they can work on some of the sort of tasks that you might want them to accomplish before they meet with you, so that when they come and talk with advisors, they're able to have those more meaningful discussions. For example, we can have them create their schedule and maybe email it to an advisor ahead of time. So then the advisor can help them make sure that's in good shape, so that whenever they have that conversation, they can talk about the things that are going on in their lives and the different needs they might have, other resources on campus they might need to connect with, other ways they can enhance their education, and those sorts of things. Charlie, did you have any other recommendations with that one?
I think one thing we have to do is we think about moving back to the in-person for virtual. Is one of the things you did virtually to connect with students, and how do we do it in an in-person situation? So how do we communicate still through email or whatever those virtual means? And then how do we build that into the conversation we have with students? How do we connect those together as we bring those and work with those pieces? I think one of the key factors is for many students, as we make this change, they don't quite understand how they interact with us differently in person than they did virtually, because it's a different environment. So our job is to begin to open up that dialogue as we work with them and move that forward. So a lot of this is going to be helping students to make that transition from a virtual experience back to a real life, particularly those who their entire experience has been with you virtually. They don't even know what it's like to be on your campus. So you're going to have to create a whole new world for them as they do those. Sean, are there other questions?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of things I'm trying to make it through. Charlie, there's lots of folks just thanking you for the heartfelt story that you shared. And, I can tell you that I heard Charlie tell the story about that nurse way back when I became an advisor in 2001. And Charlie was one of the first people I ever saw speak about advising in a professional way. And he talked about this nurse, and then turn around and 20 years later, almost, this is how this person came back to your life, Charlie. That's just such an amazing, powerful story. Thank you for sharing that. Let me see if I can find some other questions here. More questions about how we can reach out to students who do not reach back up to us. That is definitely challenging. Because one thing whenever I was working as an advisor, sometimes I felt that I would email students all the time and then I was almost bothering them. But what I found out is that some students may feel that way, but there might be students out there who it's going to take that extra contact, that extra outreach. We might feel that boy, I don't want to pester the students who are seeing these same emails from me all the time, but other students might need that final encouragement to say, wow, this person really does want to see me. So what I would always do is I would create like a second kind of groups of students who came in, who didn't come in, who was really non-responsive, kind of a three-tiered list. And the ones who were non-responsive, I would reach out to them in multiple ways. And I'm sure you've all been doing that. And I know it's very frustrating because you really need to talk with these students and they really need to work with you on something, and they don't get in touch. But I think, kind of getting in touch to continue those efforts is really important. One thing I also did too is we had a group of students who were very well trained to work with other students. We called them peer advisors or success coaches or something, depending on the campus. And sometimes the students respond to those other students differently than they would respond to the advisors. So if you have student workers that maybe you could even do like a quick training with, what are the things you don't want to say, or what are the things you do want to say, or how can you help them get connected with me? Sometimes, having that student reach out to the other student can be very useful in helping to draw them in, because they might feel embarrassed about something. They might feel there might be something going on in their life. They're just not really ready to connect with someone who they see as an authority figure. How about you, Charlie? Any other
I think you really summarized it there. I think the use of student workers, the use of colleagues, as we think about this and move forward, I think the key piece that you're all going to need to continue to think about, and I know that you're going to talk about over the next 2 days with your colleagues, is how do we keep the virtual connections as students come back to on campus? And then how do we connect those conversations, those discussions? I think what each of you bring to the table is a belief in students, a belief in higher education, a belief in how we want students to achieve, and how do we communicate that in ways that some students are always going to hear you the first time, but then know at what point they want to come in and see you, and how do we work with those. Sean and I thank you so much for letting us be a part of this today. I know that you've got places to go and other events to go to and work through, and so we just appreciate Nakata being a part of this conversation, and appreciate always Nicholas at Complete College America for allowing us to be a connection with this, and just all of you out there that I know personally, just hello, it's great to see you, and we're so excited to be here. So Lucinda, we'll turn it back over to you. Or Sharon, excuse me, we'll turn it back over to Sharon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Dr. Charlie Nutt and Sean Bridgen, thank you, thank you, thank you. Dr. Charlie Nutt, you just continue to teach and inspire academic advisors across the globe. We are extremely grateful for the leadership you bring to NACADA. as well as the significant contributions you have made to the profession and the joy. We thank you for your lifetime of exceptional work. But before you leave us now, we do have a presentation. We're trying to do this virtually. Here we go. Okay, great. So on behalf of the CUNY Advising Council members, we present you this plaque, which reads, Dr. Charlie Nutt, in recognition of your unwavering contributions to the advising profession and support of CUNY advisors, we say thank you.
Thank you so much. That means the world to me. The connection with advisors is why I do this. And so just thank you so much for allowing me to share. And thank you. That just touches my heart. And y'all all have a great time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Before we leave to the breakout rooms, I do have an announcement. Excuse me. It looks like a couple of the links in the breakout sessions were broken in the emails that were sent out this morning. The most recent email, though, has the direct attendees to the website. So please use the links that are in the website to move to the concurrent sessions in the breakout room. Again, please go to the website, look for the links for the breakout sessions for the next half of the program. Again, thank you. Remember to return at 3:30 p.m. for the closing presentation and remarks and a wonderful video. Thank you and have a wonderful afternoon.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Wow, what a great first day. Good afternoon. My name is Alana Burke, and on behalf of this year's co-chairs, Sharon Ricks and Victoria Romero, and the entire planning committee, we want to again extend a sincere thank you to Dr. Charlie Nutt for not only his keynote address, but also for his long-standing support of CUNY advisors. To echo what was said earlier, as Dr. Nutt heads into his long-deserved retirement, we wish him nothing but the very best and can honestly say that we will miss him tremendously. Thank you to Sean Bridgen, Associate Director for Partnership of NACADA, and a special thanks to CUNY's very own Dr. Lucinda Zoe for her heartfelt words. This council would not be where we are without her continued support. To our presenters in our breakout sessions, thank you for taking the time today to share your knowledge and your expertise with the rest of us. I'm sure that your sessions were well received. This last year has been like no other. During the registration process, we asked you to please share what your advising experience has been during this new normal. Here's what some of you had to say. hope you enjoyed that video. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and we cannot wait for you to see what we have in store for tomorrow, our final day of the summit. As a reminder, we will begin promptly at 9 a.m. See you all tomorrow and have a great evening.